Good afternoon, everyone. We are very happy to be here this afternoon with 4 members of the Woodwind ensemble of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. Our plan is to show you how each one of these instruments is put together, how each one is played, and how that particular unit sounds all together. We also have 2 dancers with us today for what I hope will be a very pleasant surprise. Now, let's meet the men who are with us this afternoon. First of all, the solo flutist of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra, Mr. Carl Bergner. Carl, wonderful to have you with us again. And sitting next to him in the ensemble, the solo bassoonist of our orchestra, Mr. Robert Schaefer. Bob, we hope to hear some interesting things from you. I'm sure that we shall. And next to him, the solo clarinetist of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra, Mr. William Goldstein. Very good that you're here. And finally, sitting next to him, his brother, Mr. Harvey Goldstein, who is going to show us a great deal about his beautiful instrument, the oboe. Hold it up for a moment, will you, Harvey? That's right. All right. Now let's start in, before we go into the individual explanations, with a very nice little piece for the quartet. It is called a passacaglia. Now, a passacaglia is simply an Italian word which means a walk on the street. And this is how it works. It's just as though one instrument said, well, I think I shall go out for a walk. And he starts out. And the second instrument says, wait for me, I'm coming too, and he follows. And then the third, and then the fourth. And finally they meet someplace down at the corner, catch up with each other, talk it all over and say, it's been a very, very nice walk. Now this little particular passacaglia starts out with an introduction, as though all 4 instruments were sitting around saying, what shall we do? And then they will come to a pause, and the clarinetist opens the door, and he starts out on his walk, is followed by the oboe, then by the flute, and finally the bassoon catches up. Let's watch and listen now as the Woodwind Quartet plays a passacaglia. You have just heard a passacaglia by Brath, played by a woodwind quartet of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. Now, you heard in that the device of imitation, where one instrument follows the other, where they imitate each other. And this device has worked out marvelously well in one of the most tremendous and magnificent forms of all musical composition, the form of the fugue. Now, this word, which is a Latin word and spelled F-U-G-U-E, has rather a humorous definition. In seriousness, in Latin, it means flight. but oftentimes musicians put it this way. They say a fugue is a composition where one instrument enters after the other, while each member of the audience flies out one after the other. Well, I think you will agree after you hear a fugue that the first part of the definition is correct, but not the second. Now, to try to help you to understand a fugue a little more clearly, we have brought two dancers into the studio with us today. I think they are standing over on my left. Let's meet them before we go any further. First of all, I should like to introduce you to a young lady who is going to be facing the camera in 1 minute. Her name is Phyllis Krzyzewski. This is Phyllis Krzyzewski. And then I want you to see the young lady who is standing with her back to you, and her name, if she will turn around and greet you, is Beverly Hall. Now, these two young ladies are going to demonstrate for us visually what a fugue is in sound. Just to get us started, I shall tell you very quickly that this is what a composer does when he writes a fugue. He gets a little idea, a little musical idiom, no more than maybe a few measures long, really no more than just a design. It has a little rhythmic pattern, a little melodic pattern. And he takes this design and uses it all the way through the composition in many ways. Now, the fugue we are going to use today was written by that great composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. And before we show you what he does with his design, let's listen to the design first, as it will be presented by the clarinet. Now, that's all there is to the design, no more than that. The clarinet will start it, and as he then goes on his own merry way, the oboist will enter at the point that the clarinetist finishes the design, and he will imitate him exactly, say the same design. Let's listen to them both as they make their entrance. All right. Now perhaps we can even hear it more clearly if we see it as well. Now, Phyllis is going to imitate the design as the clarinet announces it. Let's see how she takes that little rhythmic pattern, takes it with her feet from one side to the other, just as the clarinet plays it, and finally turns it around to bring the design to the end. Let's watch this. I hope that you could see the exact imitation of the design of movement to the movement of the music itself. Now, previously you heard how the oboe answered. So we are going to ask Beverly to answer Phyllis. She is standing with her back to you as though she were just an instrument of different quality. And while the two instruments do this, the two dancers are going to imitate the design also. All right, with just this beginning, let's see what happens to the whole composition. Now, I want to tell you that the composer can do many, many things with this. He takes the design, for example, and he turns it upside down if he wants to. At those places, you will see the dancers lower their hands as though they were themselves trying to turn the design upside down. In some places, he takes part of the design, only little parts, and he might have one instrument play one part and the other instrument answer. You will see the dancers answering each other. In some instances, one instrument will hold and wait for the others to catch up. The dancers will do the same thing. Or he might have them all running after each other. But he never uses any material but the material in that original little design. And this is what makes a fugue not only such a wonderfully built-up piece of architecture, but makes it such a beautifully efficient little piece of music, so clean. And it can be that either for a small group or when it is played magnificently by a huge organ or a huge symphony orchestra. Now, we mentioned earlier that the fugue we are using today was written by Johann Sebastian Bach, originally for piano. It has, however, been rearranged for our woodwind quintet by one of our very talented local composers here in Hartford, Alvin Epstein. Let's listen and watch now as the quartet plays the Fugue in C minor by Johann Sebastian Bach, arranged by Mr. Epstein, and the two dancers dance to it. Well, we hope after listening to this fugue and watching it, you won't feel that when you go into a concert hall and see the word fugue on a program, that you are going to be one of those in the audience who's going to fly right out. Now, you have been listening to the woodwind instruments, and we think perhaps at this point you'd like to come a little closer to them, to get to know them a little more, see perhaps how they are made. For example, let's turn to our flautist, Mr. Carl Bergner. Now, Mr. Bergner's instrument is not made of wood. As you can see, it is really made of sterling silver. It's very shiny on your television set, I am sure. It used to be made of wood, but the old wooden flute did not have enough power to carry through a large symphony orchestra and in a large auditorium. Now, the flute is the only woodwind instrument that is held to one side. Mr. Bergner, would you show the playing position? All others are held directly in front of the musician, but you can always recognize the flute because it is held in this manner. Now also, Mr. Bergner, show us how you take your instrument apart. There's one part, two, and finally three. And one of these, as you can see, contains the mouthpiece. If we could turn that toward the camera, Mr. Bergner, and get a good look at it, perhaps you can see there is a small opening there. And Mr. Bergner blows across this opening, it would have a sound something like this. Yes, now, when we take this into the public schools to show this to the children, Mr. Bergner always says to them, how many of you have ever taken a Coca-Cola bottle and blown across the top of it? And everyone, of course, raises their hands, and he says, well, if that's the case, all of you are potential flute players. Now, Mr. Bergner, you have three parts, and I believe you have three registers to the flute, do you not? Perhaps you could demonstrate that for us. You undoubtedly heard the difference in the sound. In the high register, not exactly shrill, but very, very bright. The middle register quite silvery, and the low register having a soft, bubbling quality. In fact, the flute has the latter quality very, very beautifully. It can bubble and purr and have a soft, smooth sound. Mr. Bergner, let's show that, may we? You can hear that it is a very fluid instrument and very, very decorative in its music. Now, sitting next to Mr. Bergner is our bassoonist, Mr. Schaefer. Now, at Mr. Schaefer's feet, he has the case in which he holds his instrument, and if we take a look into his case, we will see that all that he seems to have here is a collection of wooden pieces. We will see that in one instant, and you might be interested to know, since it looks like nothing else but a bunch of faggots in a box, that in orchestral scores the bassoon is called a fagot, the French word of fagot, either way you wish to say it. Now, Mr. Schaefer, let's start and put your bassoon together. All of you know, I am sure, that the smaller an instrument is, the higher its sound. And this is a very good illustration of how the larger an instrument gets, the lower its sound will get. Let's start first with your reed, Mr. Schaefer. Now, this looks like nothing at all, and it isn't anything more than two pieces of bamboo that are tied together. Can you hold it up a little bit, Mr. Schaefer? And when he blows on it, it has a terrible sound. Let's hear it. Certainly not the sound of music. Since there are two pieces of bamboo tied together, we call this a double reed, and we call the bassoon a double reed instrument. Let's attach the next piece, Mr. Schaefer. Now, this is a little crook, as we call it. It looks something like a shepherd's crook. Now we have still a funny sound, but lower and different. A little more musical. Now let's keep putting on the pieces, and each time as the instrument lengthens, we will blow it, and you will see what different quality you get in the sound. Now we have to add on a great big piece. Now this next piece that Mr. Schaefer is adding on is very interesting. I hope that all of you can notice that the next piece, the piece he is now adding, is really like a double piece. If Mr. Schaefer turns the bottom of his instrument up toward the camera, you will see that really this is a piece of pipe that is turning around like the plumbing in your kitchen sink and starting to come up the other side, so to speak. His fingers are holding the opening up on top there. He puts the bottom on because if we were to allow the instrument to continue in one long piece, it would seem to stretch out indefinitely. Let's hear the sound now, Mr. Schaefer. Yes, and we can get even lower as we put on what I hope will be the final piece. No, that's not the final piece yet. Look how large it's getting, twice its length. And finally, the little top, Mr. Schaefer. Not so little as you can see. That is the bassoon, the low instrument of our woodwind quartet that is here. You can always recognize it in the orchestra because it seems to have a little white donut on the top of the instrument. It has a beautiful sound, incidentally, not just a low and comical sound, but has a beautiful sound and covers a wide range of tone. Mr. Schaefer, could we demonstrate something of the range of your tone? Thank you very much, Mr. Schaefer. Now I should like to take you to the Goldstein brothers, to whom we introduced you before, and we're going to take them together because their instruments are often confused by the layman. Now, Mr. William Goldstein is playing a clarinet. Could you hold it forward, please, Billy? Now, take a good look at this instrument. You will see that on the top it has a mouthpiece which is screwed on to the instrument, and the mouthpiece has against it a single flat piece of bamboo. For that reason, we call this a single reed instrument. And now follow down the length of the instrument, and you will see the bottom of it has quite a lovely flair in its design. Now, let's look at the instrument that Mr. Harvey Goldstein is playing. This instrument is quite different in appearance when you come close to it. You will see that the top of it is a double reed, exactly as the bassoon had. Can you take that off, Harvey? You can, and it will sound, will it not, just like the bassoons? Let's hear it. Well, almost. It's a little higher than the bassoons. Now follow the length of the oboe and see that it is almost straight and has a very small, abrupt flare at the bottom. Can we hold the two instruments close together, Billy and Harvey, so that people can see the difference? And if we follow them up with the camera, you will see the oboe is also shorter than the clarinet. Now, the oboe has an entirely different kind of sound than the clarinet. And this comes not only from its construction, but also because it is blown right through on that double reed. It has a rather plaintive sound, a lonesome sound, very beautiful, almost as though some shepherd far, far away up in the hills were playing a tune that seemed to just drift down to you, something like this. It has a very, very lovely quality. Now, the clarinet has an entirely different quality. It has a warmer, richer, more woody sound, and we often compare the clarinet to a fancy skier in the mountains, in the high mountains, because he dips and he swoops and he can do all kinds of tricks on his instrument. This instrument is very, very agile. Billy, can we demonstrate something of that? Well, I'm sure now you can all hear why Mr. Goldstein is the solo clarinetist of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. Now that you have heard a little bit about each one of these instruments, let's put them together again. Let's put them together in a little tune that all of you know, I'm sure. You know it as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But we call it today Mozart's variations on the theme that you know as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Mozart wrote over 20 of these variations. Today we are just going to play the theme itself and 3 of the variations. As you watch the Woodwind Quartet, there will be parts where different instruments will have important things to do, and we will try to get you close to them so that you can get to know them a little bit better. Let's listen now to the Mozart theme and variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Mozart theme and variations on the tune Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. You have been listening to the Woodwind Quartet of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. We have tried to demonstrate some of the things about these particular instruments, and also we have tried to demonstrate something about how a composition is formed. Now, we have today a little fun piece that we would like to dance and play for you. It is called the Harmonica Player, and we think the Woodwind Quartet is excellent as imitators of a group of harmonica players, and the dancers dance the way the musicians feel. Let's listen and watch the Harmonica Player. You have been listening to the Woodwind Quartet of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra and watching two dancers who have been demonstrating for you, we hope, the fun that we have with these instruments. We hope that you also would have a great deal of fun listening to them in our symphony concerts. For example, this coming Sunday afternoon, when the Hartford Symphony Orchestra will be broadcasting from 3 to 4 o'clock over WTIC Channel 3, sponsored by the Aetna Life affiliated companies. And we hope you will then be with us again the Sunday afternoon following that for another program of Opus 3. We think ourselves that these little programs help to do what is the theme song of our symphony orchestra. We think perhaps they help you to get to know them better and love them more. This is Rena Greenwald saying good afternoon for the Hartford Symphony Orchestra and Opus 3.